I'll be right back. Yeah.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpinka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon.
I need to be a little louder. My guys in the back haven't heard you yet.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right, just to note that the event this evening is being live streamed to our YouTube page, so please be aware of the webcam next to you. I'd like to welcome you to the launch of the late Colleen Gerwing's The School of the Haunted River, published by Endless Sky Books. We are joined by Colleen's longtime partner, MaryAnn Roettger, her elder sister, Connie Gerwing, and her mentor and friend, dee Hobsbawn-Smith. I'd like to thank the three of you, as well as Ed Willett of Endless Sky Books, for working with us to create this event. Colleen Gerwing was an outdoorswoman and artist who grew up near Lake Lenore, Saskatchewan. She was a great lover of the natural world, which features prominently in her writing and painting. In her novel, The School of the Haunted River, she drew on her knowledge and love of the outdoors to write the semi-autobiographical story of an aunt and her niece on a midwinter trek in northern Saskatchewan. One of Colleen's stunning paintings provides the cover art for the book. I will now turn things over to Colleen's partner, MaryAnn. Please give her a warm welcome.
Welcome. Welcome to the celebration in honor of the launch of Colleen's book, The School of the Haunted River. Welcome to everyone here, and also welcome to all of those who are joining us online. And I know there are some too that couldn't be here but are joining us tonight. Colleen would be so happy to see all of you, as I am. And if she were here tonight, she would be celebrating for sure. And somehow, I believe she is here in spirit, maybe haunting us with her stories and her memories, and encouraging us to love nature as she did. Living with Colleen as she was writing her book made me realize how much time and effort goes into writing a book. Colleen worked very hard. She devoted many hours writing, rewriting. Thank you to all who helped her. The writers in residence at the library, Jill Robinson, her mentor with the Writers Guild, and especially dee Hobsbawn-Smith, who helped in the writing, and then, like a good shepherd, guided Colleen's book on the arduous path to publication. Dee is an award-winning author of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, and she was recently appointed our provincial poet laureate. Congratulations, dear. And thank you for all you did for Colleen and for me. Just a final comment before you hear from Dee. I would like you to know that any profits that I make from the book, I will be donating to Nature Saskatchewan and Living Sky Wildlife Rehabilitation. And now I invite Dee to come up and share her connections with Colleen and to read some of the book.
Standing room only. I love a full house. This is wonderful, wonderful. It's wonderful to see so many of Colleen's friends and family here to celebrate her work and her spirit and all that she gave to all of you. I'm sure many of you knew her much better than I did. So it's a wonderful tribute to Colleen and to MaryAnn as well, and to their extended family and friends that you are all here to celebrate tonight. Yes, thank you. I was the writer and before I start, Ed, please stand up. Ed Willett, who is the publisher of this beautiful book. Ed Willett, who is publisher of and the Sky as well, and the Sky books. This would not have happened without Ed and his diligent work and his great one-person marketing team, Mickey, who has moved mountains to get all kinds of great press happening. In lightning fast time. Right, Blitzkrieg book this one. So thank you, Ed, for doing such a beautiful job. If you haven't seen it yet, and also when you are picking up your copy, admire the beautiful photograph of MaryAnn and Colleen on the river. There's a picture sitting on the table there that the MaryAnn had blown up. So make sure you get a good look at it, because it is, as MaryAnn says, really does capture Colleen's spirit. So I met Colleen, as MaryAnn has told you, when I was at the Saskatoon Public Library as the writer in residence. That was 2015, 2016. And in that job, a person would expect to see clients once or twice, maybe a few times. But Colleen was one of several people that I saw about every 3 or 4 weeks for the entire duration of my term, the entire year. And for a year privately after that. So I saw a lot of changes in this manuscript as Colleen was trying to figure out what it was. She was an emerging writer, and she didn't know when she started if she wanted to write her story, basically, her putting together what she knows and learned and has loved about the world. She didn't know if she wanted to write nonfiction or fiction. So part of the problem, as she was becoming a writer, part of the problem was making that decision. And by the time I received the manuscript back in about March of 2021, she had seen other writers and had tipped the canoe decidedly into the fiction river. So what you're reading here is fiction, but I'm sure you all know it draws very heavily on her life and her experiences with the natural world and her many years of educating people and being out in the world and loving it so much. She came to see me with her bike helmet in hand and a brace on her knee and her bike locked up in front of the library. Sometimes she'd haul it right down into the basement when the weather was bad, but she cycled. At which point I realized what kind of a character I was dealing with. Okay, she's cycling in wintertime, all right. So really, a really truly indomitable woman. And when she got back in touch with me in March 2021, she said, "Would you please edit this once more?" Yes, of course. And then she said, "I think I've left it too late." And I didn't know what she meant. I knew she'd been ill. And then 2 weeks later, I got the message from MaryAnn that Colleen had passed on. So by then, Colleen had already asked me to put it to shepherd it, as the word was. I think of midwifing this book into being. All I did was catch it. No shaping, minimal, not a lot of editing. These are Colleen's words, tied it up and cleaned up, but no substantive editing. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to read a couple excerpts for you You may or may not have picked this up and started to look through it, but it's a story within a story with stories, right? So the narrator, Jay, is taking her niece Dilly out, named after Annie Dillard, on a 2-week winter camping holiday. I can't think of much I'd rather avoid myself, but I'm not so good on hard ground anymore. So she's doing that, and as she is taking her niece out and reintroducing her to the wild in the hopes that it will stick with young Dilly, she tells her about her experiences at outdoor school and as part of her continuing education through the outdoor school on a long 4-month canoe trip solo that she did. Jay, the protagonist, did through the northern rivers and lakes of Saskatchewan as sort of the crowning moment of her passage through this outdoor school in Wyoming that she attended. So this, of course, was Colleen's actual experience, as the brace on her knee would attested to. So I'm just going to read briefly from the beginning of chapter 1, and then we're going to move farther into it, and I'm going to read a little bit of the voice of Jay telling her story to Dilly, talking about an experience on the river, and experiences on the river in a canoe being what they are. So briefly from chapter 1 then to start. The plane, a small high-wing Cessna, shudders into life. Disturbing odors of former passengers and cargo that crinkle my nose. As we rumble down the airstrip, I wave to my sister Erica, her words unheard, shaping my name, Jay and Dilly's. Goodbye! We pick up speed and take off, and the plane buzzes like a fat bumblebee. It's cramped and stuffy with Bob, the pilot, who's built like an offensive lineman, and my niece Dilly, me, and our stuff. I think about nothing that is everything, like, what if something happens and we miss the return flight? Then the roll call again. Toilet paper, extra socks, outdoor tracker, check, check, check. And the return date, the morning of day 15, a full 2 weeks. Did someone pack sanitary napkins, extra granola bars, extra waterproof, windproof matches? We'll need them. Our 2-week snowshoe trip will take us from where Bob's plane will land us at Genuflection Lake, northwest of this tiny airport in Prince Albert, gateway to northern Saskatchewan, to where we'll get picked up at the Saskatchewan River, almost straight north. Sounds simple enough. When I myself was Dilly's age and training to be a pilot, I preferred low-wing craft with an unlimited view of the universe. But there were obstacles to women flying then, and especially the women flying alone. I never did get my license. So many starts and stops in my life. Why didn't I just focus on something and get it done? Earlier, waiting for the plane, I saw the new moon's slender crescent cradling the dark side of the elder moon, but neither the ashen old moon nor its dazzling young rim would be visible without the sun, millions of miles away. I see the same earth shine in Dilly's young face, the brightness she reflects when she's outdoors. And we're going to move ahead to the middle of the book. Chapter 14, middle of chapter 14. And at this point, the two are out in the middle of northern Saskatchewan, and Jay is telling a story to her niece about her trip on the river. A pair of teal made river life look so duck easy. Then a butterfly drifted by, but I had butterflies in my stomach. I sculled back and forth in a figure 8, reading the water, eased out into the current and backstroked to slow everything down, but a glance to the shoreline showed the trees careening past. The riverbed constricted and sped up. A smooth bulge of water flowed over a deep boulder on the right, with a big wave curling back on itself just downstream of the rock. I back paddled at an angle to ferry away from it, then roller coastered through haystacks where the water piled up on itself. Suddenly, the river broadened and thinned into a rock garden that forced me to wade alongside the canoe, guiding it over a clatter of stones. A bald eagle tottered high up in a spruce, golden eyes, observing me. The stone-studded stretch ended, and I climbed back into the canoe. 2 bends away, I heard the roar of Fairy Jean's rock. Too big to see that rock. I edged the canoe along, kept the stern snugged to the shore. The rapids thundered as spouts of water smashed into rocks and bounced off the bumpy riverbed. My canoe jitterbugged around in the eddy. I jammed my paddle on the far side of the canoe and disembarked. Rolled the canoe out of the current. Then I stuffed a long, narrow bag under the center thwart. I straddled the saddle and pointed the canoe upstream, ready to buck through the rapids. My paddle vibrated as I powered downside to the flow while leaning into the turn downstream. In a blink, a big rock came into sight. My paddle caught the corner of the eddy below it. The stern swooshed around and I faced upstream in the quiet behind the rock. The backwash held the canoe right up to the rock, the river gushing by, while the canoe sat in the eye of the storm. I slid my hand up the shaft and swung the paddle over my packs in a crossbow draw that punched the canoe behind a small rock. I was once again facing upstream. I stand and I use the axe to show Dilly the strokes and turns. Her eyes are wide, following the steel head of the axe as I swing it around. She leans back in her chair, her lower jaw dangling. The backwash propelled me out of the eddy. Then the canoe scuffed a hidden rock, and there I was, stuck on top of the granite. I leaned, pushed, finally dislodged the canoe, then rumbled over smaller rocks as I headed down the river. Backward! I kept my bow angled towards shore and powered the canoe until I could grab an overhanging tree and pull myself into quieter waters. My guts crashed around in my stomach. I clamped onto a branch, couldn't let go to face the rapids. My grip on the branch tightened, my grip on reality loosened. I aimed for the top of the boulder, but my angle failed. The river tossed the canoe like you chuck peanuts into your mouth. I hit a huge curling wave behind the eddy, and the canoe capsized. I flipped out over the gunnels, gasped, sank in the icy water, then bobbed up again. My canoe and paddle vanished. I corkscrewed through the waves on the edges of a keeper, a souse of a hole that would keep me in it forever if the torrent sucked me in. I turned on my back and my life jacket rode up over my face. I swam backwards, trying to angle myself to shore. Patches of cloud and sky blurred by. A flash of light. Something hit me. I didn't know up from down. Finally, I quit fighting and yielded to the river. Take me. I'm all yours. Do with me what you will. Then a bonk on my head. Again, a flash from up in the trees. Hang on, I hear. My arms wrapped around a pot-sized object skipping past my ear. Stay on your back, hang on. The power of something, someone, pulled me from the river as I clutched the thing. I hugged the rescue bag and let the rest of my body go limp. Jesus, I thought you was a goner. Cowboy heaved the rope with the rescue bag at the end and secured it around a tree. A ray of sun glinted off something around his neck. Words formed but stuck in my throat. The river coughed up your outfit, he says, and he left me flopped out on the water, lying on my side and drooling. Gravity weighed heavily. All your gear was tied in, so you didn't lose nothing. I think the canoe's got some damage, though. Cowboy sounded positively lively, as if the wind had just upset our picnic basket. Nothing more. I always got a throw bag on hand as I hang out by the river. Thanks. I'd have done the same for a dog, he said. But what I heard was how sorry he was that I'd ended up in the drink, and let me make you a fire and feed you hot soup and wrap you in a warm, fuzzy blanket. So, thank you. Yeah, very entertaining writer with a real sense of the outdoor world, as you will experience. So I'd like to bring up Connie Gerwing at this point. Connie is Colleen's elder sister, a retired counselor from the Prince Albert SciAst campus. So Connie.
I hadn't thought of when I read the book and saw the title until MaryAnn said it, but Colleen, I can't think of anything she'd like better than to be haunting us right now. Because I'm the oldest in the family and Colleen's 5 years older than Colleen, I thought my contribution to this book launch could be background. She didn't talk a lot. She has sections in the book, small sections on things that happened to her in her childhood or things she did in her childhood. I'm going to elaborate on some of those. I also want to say there was a section that Dee read about how she wanted to learn to fly, and she did try to become a pilot. But the reason she quit it was because she became incredibly airsick all the time. She was incredibly car sick and air sick. And if you turned a TV show on that had kind of too much movement in it, she'd have to leave the room. So that's why she never learned to fly. So I'm going to talk a bit about our life on the farm and our childhoods and read a couple sections in the book. We grew up on a mixed farm. There was grain, there was animals, there were pigs, chickens, cattle, the occasional goat, maybe some turkeys, that kind of thing. We had a lot of freedom especially compared to children now. And there was also lots of work. And any of you who've come from that kind of background know what I'm talking about. The main rule was that we don't go near the dugout, and that was kind of it. And the rest of it was, come home for supper kind of thing, or work if you had to. There weren't a lot of toys, especially as it got older, but there were bikes and bats and balls and a wagon and lots of bush and a yard and a garden. And we didn't have electricity or a TV until we were a bit older. I was 9, Colleen was 4. And TV was pretty limited even when we got it. So there was lots of scope for imagination. We had to make everything up. Our parents had come through World War II and both had left their homes and seen a bit of the world. Dad was in the military police and he went from one end of Canada to the other, and Mom went to Toronto and worked there during the war. They read lots. They were interested in the wider world. We had radio, we had magazines, we had books. So it was a life where we had lots of freedom and lots of scope for imagination, and adults around who kind of fed that to some extent also and told us stories about the bigger world. And also to live on a farm then required a lot of self-reliance. We began to work at an early age, helping with many of the farm tasks. If you were sent to take lunch out to Dad in the field somewhere, you had to remember how to get there and how to get back home again. What seemed to be hours of riding on the back of a hay rack as the horses pulled it home taught you to amuse yourself with your mind. Things broke and we fixed them ourselves or found a family member or a neighbor who could. Usually your brother. Yeah. Dad mostly treated us like farm workers, not girls to be coddled. So you can kind of see where Colleen came to a place where she was able to spend lots of time by herself out in the wilderness and have that sense of self-reliance and ability to just deal with what came along. She planned every trip in great detail and took all the equipment along that she would need, and then she just dealt with what happened on those trips. So you can kind of see where that comes from. Our mother was really resourceful, very good at figuring out how things worked. She fixed the house, she learned to build furniture, she remodeled, she sewed our clothes, she painted, she upholstered, she did all these things. Again, a role model that not everybody had of this woman who, again, would look at something and go, I can make that, I can fix that. People around us, not just our families, but our whole contact in that, at that time, modeled this kind of self-sufficiency and helped develop this sense of being able to cope with whatever the world threw at us. This is the world that Colleen grew up in, and her imagination developed early. There was a TV show I remember about Annie Oakley, who was this cowgirl. For several years it was on, and Colleen just loved that show. She was Annie Oakley for a number of years. Mom made her gun holsters. She got a set of cap guns for Christmas. She and our sister Jackie, who's here somewhere, because I can't see very well out there, would go out to the bush in the pasture, find a tree that sort of had a crook in it, and these were their imaginary horses. Mom remembers, I asked my mom's 101, so she had some stories. She remembers Colleen playing baseball all by herself, and she loved baseball for years. Baseball was a big thing, she liked that. So she was playing by herself, so she was a batter. She batted the ball. Apparently she hit it. She probably had a ball and hit it. Ran to first. The imaginary next batter came up. Colleen tried to run to second base, slid into the plate. Well, Mom didn't know what was going on. So anyway, when Colleen came into the house, Mom said, well, how did the game go? And Colleen said, I got called out at second base. I could tell you lots of stories, and I can, but this will be my last one. Like all farm families, we got the Western producer every week. The personal columns were a great source of entertainment for all of us. Farmers looking for a wife. We thought these were hilarious, but Colleen went a step further. Again, another characteristic of hers sometimes was to go a step farther. When she was a young teenager, she wrote a letter responding to a wife wanted ad. Somehow she posted it without her parents seeing, and soon she got an answer from the man, which somehow, again, I don't know how our parents missed it, because she wrote back. And the second answer, I think Dad picked up the mail, and as if, who is this writing you letters? So Colleen had to own up to this letter and show our parents, and they made her write the poor guy back and tell him that she was just a kid and she was really sorry. So I hope you're getting a bit of a picture of what Colleen was like, what shaped her. She included a few bits of some of her child adventures in the book. This one that I'm going to read begins with her telling her niece Dilly about guiding her canoe over a beaver dam, and then it switches to a story about her days on the farm. So Dilly has just put some Vaseline on her hands, which are really dry from 2 weeks of snowshoeing, and they're in the cabin in the evening. A beaver dam ruffled the river, but I picked up speed, aiming for the portal into the next world. As I smacked over the dam, I leaned back to let the bow rise across above the fray. The front of the canoe plunged into the river and water came up to the top of the gunnels as I leaned back even more, bracing with my paddle. Dilly leans back in her chair, rubbing her fingertips harder and harder. The canoe wobbled and the bow popped up as the stern cleared the dam. I was on an even keel again. Fucking boats, Auntie. I thought you were going to be thrown from that horse. We both breathed a sigh of relief. Sometimes you just get away with things. I'm trancing myself into forgetting that this is our last night in the cabin and that for me, time is speeding up. I wasn't quite your age, Dilly, and not nearly as smart as you that day that Pearl came out to the farm for her birthday. From the upstairs bedroom window, I lowered a roadkill muskrat on a rope in front of the kitchen window and swung it back and forth. She did stuff like this. I had a good rhythm going when a hysterical cry pierced the hubbub below. Pearl, I yanked up the rodent and stashed it under my bed where I was drying alfalfa. I crushed some of the dried purple flowers into a pilfered cigarette paper, rolled a couple of smokes, and tucked them into my shirt pocket along with some loose matches. Down the stairs and out the back window I slipped into the freedom of the night. I struck a wooden match on a stone, but the breeze burned it out like some exploding sun. I crept closer to the old farmhouse and paused in the comfort of the din seeping through the windows. I backed away and was drawn to the yard light where 4 stout barrels of purple gas stood in a circle. I climbed into this windbreak and struck a match. Whoa, so you just about joined that muskrat in heaven. I think those stories are kind of compressed, but they're all true. I'm in talking about this book and her early life with my family. None of us really remember when she became really interested in the North. We didn't know much about the boreal forest. We never went there. We were kind of in the parkland. We never went camping. We never went canoeing. Never even heard of a canoe until I was much older. But early in the book, she says in a brief statement, I believe that when I was born, with my very first breath, some primal force began pulling me along a winding trail, through a forest to a river and down a current. Mm-hmm. The year she graduated from high school, a friend and I took Colleen and our another younger sister, Jackie, on a trip to Buffalo Narrows, where we knew someone. It was our first time that far north. A local bush pilot took us on a flight over the lake and a nearby village. Maybe it might have been Dillon. They were both Jackie and Colleen were enthralled by the northern forest in different ways, but that might have been the real beginnings of Colleen's attraction to that part of the province. She worked at Waskesiu for some people from our hometown who owned the Lakeview Hotel for many years. Now, you can't imagine what her first job was there. She was a waitress. Now, those of you who know Colleen well might be surprised that she would be there. She didn't last long. Her love of the park, though, the forest, the rivers, the lakes, lasted her whole life. I'm going to read, I think that's the last I'm going to read, yeah. I know many of you here knew Colleen in different ways than I did. And if you want to share any stories now, this is a good time. And if you do, and when I'm because I'm the last one, I also want to thank you all for coming. And I really appreciate such a big crowd, and I really hope you enjoy the book. So who's got some stories? I have a story. You gonna come to the mic? Yes.
Hi, I'm Elaine Muth. I first got to know Colleen in the 1980s. And as I got to know her, I realized that she had all this experience with solo camping, and I was really interested in solo camping. So she became my mentor and guide for solo camping, and it was all arranged. She took me to a place not too far from Saskatoon, I think, but seemed so remote that I wouldn't be able to tell you today where it is or how to get there, but she had everything planned. She had a tarp over, I think, some trees or tree branches, and that was going to be my shelter for 48 hours of solo camping. And she had brought other things, but she'd also given me a list of things to bring. And then she said she was going to be nearby. Again, I don't know where she was, but I trusted that she was nearby in case anything happened. And that's where I solo camped for a couple of days. And she had showed me her field journal at that point, and she said, now I blocked off these about 25 pages. She said, so if you just read this part, don't read the other parts. And I did. And it was really interesting to read her adventures. It was all about how she canoed and skied. And it was mostly, I think, that part of her journal was about going into Waskesiu and beyond that to Grail's cabin and the wildlife. And I think there was even some sketches in the field journal, if I remember correctly. So that was really inspiring to me. And it was a great experience. And so I'm anxious to read the book because I'm wondering how much of that unpublished manuscript that I read in 1989 is actually going to be part of the book. Thanks.
All right, so we've got time for a brief question and answer period. So I'm just going to pass this mic over. We're going to do a brief scene change.
All right, so if you've got any questions, feel free to ask, or any more stories you want to ask about.
Let's start right up here. What's your name, please?
Olivia.
And do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, for MaryAnn.
Yay.
MaryAnn, did you realize that one of Colleen's trips to Grail's cabin, the temperature was more than 40 below? Did she tell you after, or did you know it was while she was
Probably after. I was in great trepidation every time Colleen announced that she was going to do a solo winter camping trip, because I was always afraid. Wolves, cold, all alone, no cell phone or anything like that. But you know what? It was her spirit and her way of connecting with nature. And so, yes. You could probably tell stories too.
Did she ever get in serious trouble that she needed rescuing? Or did she always make it out by herself?
She usually made it out by herself. I rescued her once. It was sort of a rescue. She had gone, it might have been the last trip she did, the last solo winter camping trip. She was going to go in from the highway north of the park and then along a power cut line and then along the Waskesiu River and then into Waskesiu. And my job was to drop her off at the power cut line and then come back and pick her up 3 days later, 4 days later, I forget what it was. But by that time she had a tracking device. So I was watching that, and then by the second day, all of a sudden I realized she wasn't moving. And then I kept watching and watching, and I realized she was coming back. And I'm watching and watching, and I don't know what happened. So anyway, I sort of watched, and then I went up there when I judged that she must be getting close to the highway again, back where she had started. And I walked in a little ways, I snowshoed in a little ways, and I wrote her a note in the snow that I was there so she'd know. And then I went back to the car and I waited, and about 3 hours later, she turned up. And what had happened was the Waskesiu River was just covered with deadfall. And so she couldn't get through. She always had a big, like a sleigh with all her stuff on it. She couldn't get through it. So she'd come back out. She was just gonna hitchhike into Waskesiu, but I was there. So it was sort of a rescue, but
She was big sister to the
Yeah.
rescue.
Dee, do you have any favorite memories of working on the manuscript with her?
Ask that.
I have a question. My name is Ilona Voltaire, which nobody remembers. But anyway, I turned to Dee as an editor. And from what I heard, just congratulations on capturing that voice. And you know, the writing reminds me of Jack London, that kind of power and torque. And so how did you manage to do that as an editor? I mean, kudos to you, but you know, how do you capture that voice and power and action and, you know, maintain the emotional balance?
Well, it was mostly already on the page, Ilona. That's a good question. It was mostly already on the page. Before the first 2 years that we worked together, Colleen's job was getting the story on the page and figuring out the shape of it and whether or not it was, as I said, fiction or nonfiction. Once she had it on the page and it came back to me in 2021, that impulsion was already there. And a lot of my job was to see what was extraneous that was getting in the way of, you know, kind of blocking the current. So really, without doing any structural damage or anything, it was a really light editorial hand. It was mostly just keeping that forward energy going. So when she was recounting the story, there weren't too many interventions from the character of her niece that would have slowed it down, but enough that people would remember that this was a recollection and that there were multiple characters in the story. Yeah, good question.
So I asked the second part of that question. What do you tell writers about free fall? You know about free fall, right?
One of the best tools.
Okay, so
One of the best tools, yes. Free fall is when, as a writer, one of my ways to enter the state of free fall is I usually like to do something akin to a meditation to kind of get me away from what's going on and where my head has been, so that when I start writing, I write and I keep my hand moving. You keep your hand moving, keep your hand moving, and if you can't think of anything that's going forward, you write the last few sentences of the last sentence again. And it has an energy. A lot of it needs editing afterwards, but if you set a timer and then you don't stop until the timer and you surface, then what is on the page has the possibility of having some energy that doesn't show when I'm consciously, okay, I'm going to build this scene. Free fall is like falling down the well of creation. It's a very cool state. I think she did. Yeah, I think she did. Although she had, as you heard, she had a lot of stories to draw on.
yeah. Thank you.
She told stories all the time as a child. She told stories constantly. Our sister Jackie said, was telling us one at supper, as Colleen had her so scared, she was literally shaking. And she used to do this to our youngest brother too, that she would make up ghost stories at night before he went to bed. And Mom had to put a stop to it because it just scared the hell out of her. So stories were certainly part of what she did from a very young age.
It was a storyteller. That was really evident that she was.
Yes.
All right, so if there are no more questions, I'll just say a quick word before I let you go. I'd like to thank MaryAnn, Connie, and Dee again for being with us tonight. We have copies of The School of the Haunted River available for sale on the desk next to you there. Thank you all so much for joining us and celebrating Colleen's work. Please enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.